There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes with standing in an empty church. It's not the loneliness of being by yourself, but the loneliness of realizing that this huge space above you, the high ceilings, the colored glass windows letting in red and gold light, was built for a conversation that stopped happening. Friedrich Nietzsche knew this loneliness. He was born in 1844 in a tiny village in Prussia, so small you could walk around it in the time it takes to say a prayer. He grew up in the shadow of his father's death, a Lutheran minister who died when Friedrich was only 5 years old. The boy who would one day announce the death of God was raised in a house full of widows: his mother, his sister, his grandmother, 2 aunts. Women dressed in black, whispering hymns into the spaces where certainty used to live. But this isn't just Nietzsche's story, it's ours too. Picture Europe in the mid-1800s. The Industrial Revolution is churning away, factory smokestacks replacing church steeples as the tallest things on the horizon. Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species in 1859, suggesting that we're not God's special creation, but the result of blind, grinding time. Marx is writing that religion is like a painkiller for suffering people, not a sacred truth, but something to numb the pain. The Enlightenment's promise of reason has grown into something sharper, a knife that cuts open the miraculous and finds only ordinary machinery inside. And yet, on Sundays, the churches are still full. People still bow their heads, still say the prayers their grandparents said. But something has changed. It's not that nobody believes anymore. It's that belief has become a choice, one option among many, like picking a coat from a closet. When faith becomes optional, has it already stopped being faith? Nietzsche saw this before most people did. He saw the cracks in the foundation, the slow wearing away of a worldview that had shaped Western thinking for over 1,000 years. And in 1882, in a book called The Gay Science, he did something bold. He sent a madman into the marketplace to announce the news. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. Let's sit with that scene for a moment. A man lights a lantern in the bright morning and runs to the marketplace, screaming, "I'm looking for God. I'm looking for God." The people around him, good non-religious folks who've already stopped going to church, laugh at him. They mock him. "Has God gotten lost?" they joke. "Is he hiding? Is he afraid of us?" But the madman isn't joking. He smashes his lantern on the ground and delivers one of the most chilling passages in Western philosophy. Where has God gone? I'll tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? Do you hear what he's saying? It's not celebration. It's horror. He's not saying, "Good riddance to religion, now we're free." He's saying, "Do you understand what we've done? Do you understand how big this is?" Because here's the thing about God, not as an old man with a beard in the clouds, but as an idea, a framework. For over 1,000 years, God was the answer to the biggest questions we could ask. Why does anything exist? God created it. What makes something right or wrong? God's rules. What happens after we die? God judges us. Why should I keep going through suffering? God has a plan. God wasn't just a religious idea. God was the ground beneath every ground, the starting point beneath every starting point, the assumption that made all other assumptions possible. And then we started pulling at that thread. Copernicus said, "We're not the center of the universe." Galileo said, "The heavens follow laws, not moods." Newton said, "Give me matter and motion and I can explain the cosmos." Darwin said, "You don't need a designer to explain why things are complex. Each discovery, each insight, another pull on the thread." And suddenly, people started to wonder, what if the universe doesn't need God to explain it? What if morality doesn't come from commandments, but from human agreements, human evolution, human power? What if we've been praying to empty air? But here's where Nietzsche's argument gets sharp, where his reasoning really bites. Look at what happened. We didn't just lose a religious belief, we lost the whole structure of meaning that religion provided, and most of us haven't noticed yet. Nietzsche's Madman says, "This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves." The crowd in the marketplace has killed God, but they're still acting like he's alive. They still talk about human rights as if they're sacred. They still say justice as if it's written into the fabric of the universe. They still judge actions as good or evil as if those categories exist on their own, independent of human opinion. But if God is dead, if there's no cosmic judge, no divine lawmaker, no spiritual foundation, then where do these values come from? This is Nietzsche's trap, his logical puzzle. If you reject God but keep Christian morality, caring for the weak, equality of all souls, the meek inheriting the earth, you're living in a contradiction. You're an atheist who still believes in sin, a materialist who still believes in holiness. You've wiped away the horizon, but you're still trying to navigate by the stars. Now, this is where people get Nietzsche wrong. They think he's saying, "Great. No God means no rules. I can do whatever I want." That's not it at all. Nietzsche is terrified of what comes next. He calls it nihilism, the emptiness that opens up when all values lose their foundation, when nothing means anything because there's no ground for meaning, when good and evil are just words we made up, no more binding than the rules of a game. He writes, in the voice of the madman, "Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Do you hear the weight in that? Must we ourselves not become gods? In other words, if there's no God to provide meaning, we have to create it. If there's no divine order, we have to build order from chaos. If there's no eternal truth, we have to will our own truths into being." This is where the Übermensch enters, Nietzsche's vision of the human who comes after the death of God. Not a fascist Superman, that's his sister Elizabeth's twisted version, her poisonous gift to the Nazis, but a person who can stand in the void without falling apart, who can create values without needing them approved by heaven, who can say, "I choose this as meaningful," and make it so through the pure force of their will. The Übermensch doesn't discover meaning. They create it. But let's be honest. How many of us can actually do that? How many of us can stare into the emptiness, the cold, infinite, uncaring universe, and not look away? How many of us can create our own values from scratch, with no instruction manual, no divine blueprint, no cultural agreement to hide behind? Nietzsche himself couldn't do it. In 1889, in Turin, he reportedly saw a horse being beaten in the street. He ran to the animal, threw his arms around its neck, and collapsed. He spent the last 11 years of his life in silence, cared for by his mother and sister, his mind broken. The man who told us to become gods ended up shattered. Maybe that tells us something about the cost of this philosophy. Maybe it tells us something about what it means to carry the weight of self-created meaning in a meaningless universe. And yet, people argue with this. Of course they do. Søren Kierkegaard, who lived around the same time as Nietzsche, said, "Faith begins precisely where thinking leaves off." For Kierkegaard, the death of rational certainty isn't a tragedy. It's the requirement for real faith. You don't believe in God because it makes sense. You believe in spite of reason, through a leap into the absurd. Modern Christian defenders like Alvin Plantinga argue that belief in God is properly basic, as foundational as belief in other minds or the reality of the past. God isn't dead because some intellectuals stopped believing. God is alive in the experience of billions who still pray, still worship, still feel his presence in their lives. And then there are the postmodernists, Derrida, Foucault, who took Nietzsche's hammer and kept swinging. If God is dead, they said, then all big stories are suspect. Not just religion, but reason, progress, truth with a capital T. Every claim to universal meaning is just a power play dressed up in fancy language. So where does that leave us? Here, now, in a world where you can scroll through a dozen belief systems on your phone before breakfast, where truth is whatever gets the most likes, where we're simultaneously drowning in information and starving for meaning. We're the people in Nietzsche's marketplace. We've killed God, maybe not individually, but collectively, as a culture, and we're still figuring out what that means. Some of us retreat into fundamentalism, trying to bring the corpse back to life through pure willpower. Some of us embrace the void, calling it freedom, even as the dizziness sets in. Some of us build temporary altars to science or progress or social justice or the market, new gods that promise to fill the hole the old one left. But none of them quite fit, do they? Because the God that died wasn't just a religious figure. It was the possibility of absolute meaning, the idea that there's a right answer, written into the cosmos, available if only we could read the right scripture or solve the right equation. What if there is no right answer? What if meaning is something we make, not something we find? What if the universe is fundamentally indifferent, and every value we hold is a fragile human construction, no more true than any other? Can you live with that? Nietzsche thought we could. He had to believe we could, or else his whole philosophy collapses into despair. He gave us tools. The Übermensch, yes, but also Amor Fati, the love of fate, the idea that you could embrace your life so fully, so completely, that if someone offered you the chance to relive it exactly as it was, forever, you'd say yes. He gave us eternal recurrence, a thought experiment that doubles as a moral test. Live as if every choice you make, you'll have to make again and again, infinitely. Does that thought crush you or excite you? He gave us perspectivism, the idea that truth is always from a point of view, always partial, always situated. Not that all perspectives are equal. He wasn't saying that, but a challenge to the idea of a God's eye view. These aren't easy gifts. They're not comforting, but maybe that's the point. Because here's what Nietzsche understood, in his bones, in his madness, in his lonely rooms overlooking Swiss mountains and Italian squares. The death of God is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. It's a crisis because we're animals that need meaning the way we need oxygen. We can't live without stories that tell us who we are, where we're going, why it matters. And when the story that held civilization together for 1,000 years falls apart, we're in free fall. But it's an opportunity because, for the first time, we're forced to take responsibility for our values. We can't blame them on God anymore. We can't hide behind tradition or scripture or natural law. We have to look at what we believe, what we cherish, what we're willing to die for, and ask, why? Says who? By what authority? And if the only authority is us, then we'd better start taking ourselves seriously. I think about Nietzsche's Madman sometimes, smashing his lantern in the marketplace. I think about his final words in that scene. I come too early. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. He was right. His time wasn't then. Maybe it's now. Maybe we're finally living in the aftermath of God's death, the full weight of it pressing down on us. Maybe that's why everything feels so unanchored, so liquid, so impossible to hold on to. We're trying to build meaning in a universe that doesn't provide instructions, trying to be good without a definition of goodness. trying to love in a cosmos that doesn't love us back. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's even beautiful. Maybe the fact that we keep trying, that we keep reaching for meaning even when we know it's not guaranteed by the universe, is the most human thing about us. But I want to leave you with this, because Nietzsche never gave easy answers, and neither should we. If God is dead, if there's no ultimate meaning handed down from above, then the meaning you create, the values you choose, the life you build, what makes yours worth living for? And if you had to defend your answer to someone with completely different values, completely different starting points, completely different gods, or no gods at all, what would you say? Not what should you say, not what feels right to say, but what could you say standing in that emptiness with nothing but your own breath and your own heartbeat as evidence that any of this matters at all?